Hey everyone, welcome to episode 2 of the Bums in the Bleacher podcast, brought to you by the Chicago Sports Bums. I'm Drammy Sosa alongside Praz Master. Looks like we've got some Wi-Fi issues cleaned up over there.
We do. Reset the hamster wheel earlier today. Everything's running a lot better than it was last week when I was attempting to do this all off my phone in a basement. So, lesson learned from that. We're running better this week, just
Well,
like
I mean,
and running better this week, just like our Cubs.
yeah, it wouldn't be a first episode without any glitches. So, it's a good thing that your Wi-Fi is great because we have a lot to cover. A lot
Yes.
has happened within the week, right? So you can see our episode name is OppenJeimer. We have the return of the Candyman, Jeimer Candelario getting traded back to the Cubs where he was drafted. And then obviously we could talk through like the trade deadline and, the trades they made. We traded for, Jeimer, we traded for Jose Quaz, and nothing else really. So, what were your thoughts on the trade deadline? I thought it was a great move getting Jeimer. Quaz, I don't know a lot about, but what were your overall thoughts on the actual trade deadline?
Uh, Obviously love the move for Jamer. If you guys did watch episode 1 before my internet did crap out, that was the guy that I was clamoring for the Cubs to get. First base and third base, two positions he play. They had kind of been a hole earlier this season for the Cubs. He plays either or, depending on where Ross wants to play him. There's a couple different platoon options that he has with that, whether he wants to have, Madrigal starting at third or Jamer starting at third, and he wants to get Wisdom's bat in there, or it wouldn't be Wisdom's bat, but, you get Cody Bellinger over at first with Candelario over at third, then Talkman in center. But yeah, he's got a lot more options and a versatile player and a great hitter in Jeimer Candelario, who, first couple games, like, got off to an 8-for-9 start. Like, you could not get this guy out the second you put him back in blue pinstripes.
Yeah, you could see it here over 6 games. He's hitting .571 with the .640 on base, .905 slug, and an OPS of 905. Or I'm sorry, 1.545. Has 2 doubles, 1 home run, and 3 ribbies in 6 games. So I can't get off to a much better start than that after getting traded.
That's like Manny Ramirez in the 2008 NLDS numbers right there. Like, before anyone figured out that he was juicing as much as he was, like, he was just killing us that entire series, but similar numbers for the Candyman.
Yeah, no, I loved it. And I was in agreement with you. I thought that was the bat that they needed and quite possibly the best bat on the market after, Ohtani was taken off the market, after Bellinger was, being pulled off as well from the Cubs. Jeimer was probably the best bat on the market. And, to your point, gives great flexibility, can play third base, can play first base, and play both above average, right? Both, so I thought that was a great move for their part. They picked up one arm in the bullpen in Jose Quaz, which, depending on which way you're looking at it, unfortunately to me was a right-hander, and I think that we obviously lack some left-handed depth in the bullpen, and that was also followed by Anthony Kay getting sent down to AAA. So, what were your thoughts on maybe some of the things that they didn't accomplish? What more would you have liked to see them actually accomplish?
Well, you read my mind with left-handed reliever. It's been a need for the Cubs this entire season. When they broke camp, like, the only one on their 40-man roster, let alone their active roster, was Brandon Hughes. He started out on the injured list. Was really promising last year, obviously, but struggled a lot in the time that he was on the active roster this year. And, in between that time, you've only really seen Anthony Kay get called up. I think you saw Ryan Barucki, if I remember his name right. He was called up for a few games in, like, May. Now, it does help that, Mark Leiter Jr. has emerged recently as a guy who is a reverse split reliever that can get lefties out.
Yeah.
Super valuable piece to have, and Ross has utilized him well. But they're the big name that I was really targeting, and I saw Jesse Rogers tweet about this right around the trade deadline. A little more from Jesse Rogers later in the show, folks.
Yeah, right.
But he had said something about over on the south side, Aaron Bummer of the White Sox, who had, pretty astronomical numbers of high ERA and a high WHIP and everything, but was a guy that was, had previously had great seasons and had a high ground ball rate, and was a guy that, had he came to the Cubs with a better defense behind him, could have been a much more effective reliever. And I feel like the Cubs really missed the boat on an opportunity to get to fill a hole that they needed at what would have probably been a pretty cheap price, considering what Bummer's numbers were like to this point in the season.
Yeah, they would have definitely been buying low there, but yeah, I mean, my worry now is, and I know we're going to get to it later, right? But we started off the season with probably the most underused bullpen the first half of the year, where we had a lot of starters that were going deeper into games. We weren't spending the bullpen a lot, or they weren't overspent. So now we're kind of starting to see the opposite of that in the second half, where we're starting to get closer to playoff time, where you want your bullpen to be a little bit more rested, a little bit more healthy. Yep. Obviously, like, you're going to have bigger, higher leverage innings, that are more important down the stretch. Especially in these dog days of summer. And I worry about the depth they have. It's like, what more moves can they make at this point that can fortify some of those, positions at the back of the bullpen? Like, do they DFA a guy like Patrick Wisdom to create like another spot for a pitcher in their bullpen? Do they keep Caleb Killian and maybe, he starts catching fire as a starter, gives you some quality innings? They move Drew Smiley to the bullpen potentially, and you have your your lefty in the pen at that point. I mean, what do you think is, I guess, what do you think the next steps in for the, the final roster construction is, before the final push?
Well, they do have the options out there if they want to, of like making another trade that like would not be eligible to be with them in the playoffs should they make it. We saw a couple of those moves made today, so they might not be able to help you in October, but they will help you get to October. Maybe call the White Sox and see what they would want for Aaron Bummer. They are still active right now. They made a move today. They do, the Cubs do have one option I really like down in Iowa, Bailey Horn, that had, he came over in the trade for Ryan Tepera in 2021, I believe. Probably about the highest upside option you have right now. His numbers haven't been all that impressive, but then again, it's in AAA where it's relatively a hitter's league. I think he had an ERA around 4.35, had strikeout to walk in the mid twos somewhere. So that's probably the best option you're looking at as far as the Cubs, trying to find some sort of option for specifically a left-handed reliever going forward.
Yeah. I think, it is going to be a lot of looking internal at that point, and I think there's probably a couple more moves that, I was thinking Anthony Kay was somebody who was probably going to get optioned, and he did. And I think Wisdom is probably going to be the next guy that is going to be left off the roster. I think he's running out of options here with the big league club. He hasn't really hit well. We know how streaky he can be, but he's going to lose a lot of bats now with Candelario coming in, playing third and splitting time at first with Cody. Talkman's played super well, so you're not taking at bats from him when he's out in center or even right. I mean, he's played so well, he's starting to push Seiya out of the lineup, who hasn't played in a few games. So it's going to be interesting to see what they do the rest of the way. But, I think that Jed did what he could with what he had. I think that you're kind of playing with house money in some ways, where like we knew that this was a year that, again, we talked about in the last episode that he talked about this being a contention year. Maybe not World Series contenders, but thought that we would be competitive. So they are doing what maybe he thought they were going to do. Their expected, win-loss rate is much higher than their actual record. So he had a good feeling that, hey, this team is better than what they look like on paper or look like, from a record standpoint. But also didn't want to push in all those chips yet. You don't want to throw in all your prospects right away, when this is a year that maybe we're not necessarily like one or two players away from contending for a World Series.
Exactly.
Well, before we move on, I wanted to do a little bit of a shameless plug for podcast godfathers, the Chicago Sports Bums. They did a barrel pick with CD Liquors in Bolingbrook. First day came out, ran over and grabbed it, pull it right here. Got a nice little Knob Creek single barrel bourbon, 120 proof.
Can't wait to get mine from the HBIC when I see him on Friday.
I know. I was texting him and I was like, dude, do you want me to get it from you? Do you want me to get it from the liquor store? Like, I want to make sure that you're covered. But I just cracked it today. It is a good pick. And I will say that, Knob Creek picks are usually really, really solid. I'm also, I'm a Beam fan. So, Booker's, thinking through like some of the Hardens Creek stuff. All that stuff is really great to me. I love, kind of the nuttiness that you get on some of their products. But I will say with this one, I didn't get as much of the nuttiness on the taste that I normally do with some of their other bourbons. I got a lot of like dried cherries on the notes, a lot of vanilla and caramel, super sweet nose. Palate was much different than what I expected from the nose. Got a lot of that oaky tannic finish, which was really good. Got a little bit of the nuttiness, but I got a little bit of orange and butterscotch on that too. So it was, it's a really good pour. So I'm going to tell everybody who listens to us, everyone who follows me in the whiskey community, this is a great Knob Creek pick. Big fan. Go out and get it. CD Liquors Bolingbrook, or just reach out to the Chicago Sport Bums at Shy Sports Bums on Instagram and Twitter. So reach out to those guys. They did an awesome job. I know they got a rye pick coming out too, which, ryes sometimes don't fly as quickly, but if it's anything as good as this bourbon, it should fly off the shelf. So great pick to our Godfathers of podcast.
It's not bourbon,
but it's all right. So great job to them.
Soon enough from joining you guys, you'll get me into being a bourbon bum, because I got a couple bottles at home, not as big of a collection as I see you or Peter or Jason have, but I got one coming from Jason, and everything you just said about that bottle sounds delicious. So
yeah, we'll have to
try that Knob Creek.
We'll set up some nights. We'll just do some tastings. We'll do some drinking and just enjoy some good whiskeys and, some good times. So, but speaking of home cooking, let's talk about our boys and what they did this past week. Over the last 7 games, they went 5-2 on the homestand, which, we had a big series against the Reds, who at the time were in first place. Yep. And then we followed that up with 3 games against the Braves, who are, almost without question the best team in the National League, and took two out of 3 from them. So, I know you were at a couple of the games, right, against Cincinnati, or just one?
The first 2 games against Cincinnati, lost on Monday night, although, that game started off poorly with poor effort from Marcus Stroman that we'll get into, but they made a pretty valiant effort to come back in that game. Christopher Morel came within inches of hitting a game-tying home run that night. But then Tuesday night was a lot more fun. Got to see score that looked a little more like Bears Bengals than Cubs Reds. 20-9 score in that one, with Cody Bellinger tearing the cover off the ball. You had Jeimer Candelario's 2023 Cubs debut. Justin Steele goes 6 strong innings for you. It was 20-5 going to the top of the 9th too. So almost half the runs the Reds scored in that game were in total garbage time too, to use another football term. That was a hell of a game to be out in the bleachers for. Haven't been to one. It didn't go to any of the other Reds or Braves games. Needless to say, for that Brave series, tickets were a little expensive. But overall, this was a huge homestand for the Cubs in that, they were hot before this, but they were playing the Cardinals twice, the White Sox in the middle of there, 2 teams that are well out of their division races. So there was still a little bit something to prove there. The they take 3 out of 4 from the Reds, and that is really encouraging to me, because earlier this year around Memorial Day weekend, the Reds did come into town, and they did not even have Ellie De La Cruz with them when they came here, and they took all 4 from us. This was
Yeah.
huge, taking 3 out of 4 from the Reds, showing that we not only can we hang with them, but we pass them up too in the next few days.
Yeah. It was, I mean, it
Sorry, go
was,
ahead.
no, I think it was just a crazy series that, to your point, I think it proved what a lot of us were trying to hope and think that the Cubs really were. We try to believe that they were actually better than what the record suggested, better than what they had been played, what they played in the first half of the year. And I think when you look at the NL Central, every one of these top teams, the three teams, right? Looking at Milwaukee, Chicago, Cincinnati, all of these teams are incredibly flawed. You have Milwaukee
Yes.
where great pitching can't hit. You look at Cincinnati, great hitting, can't pitch, and then you look at the Cubs where they have both of those things, but not really doing them at the same time. Right?
It's like they do both. They do both things better than the poor side of what the Brewers and the Reds do. They don't really excel at hitting or pitching really, but I looked it up earlier today. As of going into play today, this may change with how the Cubs are looking tonight. But going into play today, only 3 teams in the National League were above average in runs scored per game and team ERA. Those 3 teams were the Braves, the Cubs, and the Padres. So, the Cubs are hanging in there with the best of the best in the National League. Obviously, the Padres are still trying to get their stuff together, but they're kind of in a similar position to the Cubs. They're clawing their way back into the race as well.
Yeah, and before that Brave series too, I know the Cubs had, since the All-Star break, ended and we kind of got back to baseball, they had 141 runs, which was 36 or something more runs than or 34 more runs than the Braves, who were second in most runs scored since the All-Star break. And even if you took out both of those blowout games that the Cubs had where they scored 20 and 16, they still would have been up 7 runs over the Braves. So
wow.
To your point is they have been hitting the ball and they've been playing really well offensively. And by the way, they just scored another run. So it's 5-2 Mets in the bottom of the 5th. So trailing the Mets right now by 3. But
please don't sue us, MLB, for giving score updates in the middle of the podcast.
Let's hope not. Cease and desist. I know Baloney wants those, but maybe not. But yeah, I mean, the offense has been great, and I think we talked about it, the pitching has, at the beginning of the year starting, was really great. Bullpen was kind of a little bit rocky, and now we're kind of seeing that flip. And I think that's just baseball. You see that a lot of times when starting is, not great. The bullpen usually picks them up, and then vice versa. And you see those from, pretty good teams. So I'm very hopeful that, this team will continue the rest of the year at this pace. I think the Reds pitching really kind of caught up to them. We kind of started to see what their pitching really was, especially when they faced a hot offense like the Cubs. I think it's going to be interesting when we play Milwaukee at the end of the month, what that's going to look like with their pitching and, maybe their lack of hitting. But I think it's pretty promising looking the rest of the year at the rest of the schedule. We saw 2 games, like you said, against the Reds where they just completely demoralized them. And we saw their catcher doing some mop-up duty in a couple of games, right? So that was pretty fun.
Mailed it in on back-to-back nights. I got to see Luke Maile come into pitch when the Cubs were blowing out the Reds, and, wasn't a whole lot better. Wasn't a whole lot, but a whole lot better than what they were throwing previously in that game. The Cubs offense took off in that series. And granted, the Reds pitching is not impressive, but to score 20 runs and 16 runs in back-to-back games, what was the stat going around that it had been since 1897? Was that just the Cubs, or was that any major league team?
Baseball. I think that was all in baseball.
Jeez.
Yeah, it was wild. And like I said, that series was so great, and I almost wonder how demoralizing of a series that was for Cincinnati, because we saw right after that series, they lost 3 straight to the bottom feeders, the Washington Nationals.
They've been helping us out greatly on and off the field this past week, because I think right before that they played the Brewers and took 2 out of 3. And thank you very much for Jeimer Candelario.
Yep. Go Nationals until
Yeah.
I don't know if we play them the rest of the year, but
No, we're done with them.
good.
No, thankfully.
So
Because they
they'll
did
get
take
solid
3 out of 4
favors.
from us earlier.
Yeah, right. Apparently, if they played in the NS Central, they'd be the they'd be the division leaders. But let's jump into Atlanta, because I thought that was a pretty defining series. Like where maybe when the season's done, if the Cubs go on to make the playoffs, this could be a very like season defining series, right? Where they took 2 out of 3 from the best team in the National League. The first game got blown out. We saw what the Braves offense can do. They have like 5 or 6 guys in that lineup that have like 20 something home runs or more. It's crazy.
It might be the most loaded lineup this side of like the mid 2000s Yankees, with like A-Rod, Jeter, Bernie Williams, like that level strong.
Yeah, Teixeira or whoever else you want to throw in there, right? But
right,
that was I mean, they have a loaded lineup, and I mean they flex their muscles game 1. But I thought what was really impressive is where we've seen earlier in the season where we've been beaten badly, the next game they come out just incredibly flat, and this series they didn't. They came out, they got an early lead, or they clawed back, or they fought back in the last 2 games, either or. They played extremely well. They played some really good defense. They didn't get the best starting pitching, but their bullpen held up. The game 2 was a little bit close for comfort, too close for comfort, and we saw Alzolay actually give up some runs in that game.
Yes.
But the rubber match was really impressive from the bullpen too, where they shut down that offense, back half of that game.
They did. I'll tell you, the rubber match was it was a game that I brought this up to you when we were talking earlier. It kind of made me feel, and I thought this going into the series too, but this series had a feel of it similar to a series the Cubs played in 2003 against the Yankees that really kind of put them on the map, where they took 2 out of 3 at Wrigley Field, and it was a recent World Series champion, just like the Braves are, going up against this scrappy bunch of Cubs that had been a few years out of the playoffs, and they showed that they can hang with them and at times beat them. The game 3 of that series, I was really hoping Justin Steele could go deeper than he did. He only went about 5 1/3. Ross, I believe, Ross really wanted it from him too, because of the way that he's had to rely on his bullpen this past week.
Yeah, they were taxed.
They truly were taxed, especially after game 1 of that Red series, if we want to go back into that with Stroman's struggles. But gave them a valiant effort against a really good offense. And then, in the middle of that inning when Steele got pulled, it was bases loaded and 1 out, and they had to face Ronald Acuna, who's the NL MVP favorite at this point. Yeah. And then Austin Riley, who's another guy who's probably going to finish probably top 10 or 15 in NL MVP this season.
Yep.
Wound up getting through that. Wasn't there another one in there too? Ozzie Albies, I believe.
Oh yeah, the Cub killer, Ozzie Albies.
Yes, who has killed the Cubs. Yeah. Even when the Braves were bad, when he first got called up, he's been killing the Cubs ever since then.
Yeah, he's in like 350, I think, lifetime against the Cubs or something crazy like that. He's just, he kills us.
Yeah. Well, I mean, bringing it back to like my 2003 comparison, there was a moment in game 2 of that series, the game in which Kerry Wood and Hesop Choi collided with each other mid-game. Hesop Choi had to be brought out on the cart. Later in that game, after the Cubs had taken the lead, they got into a bases-loaded jam with Jason Giambi at the plate and 2 outs. The Cubs were up 3-1. Mike Remlinger, really reliable left-handed reliever from that era, wish he was on the Cubs right now, struck out Jason Giambi, who had been maybe the most dangerous hitter in baseball this side of Barry Bonds at that time. Well, Michael Fulmer, a reliever that, we had our ups and downs with earlier this year when he was a closer, but he's kind of found himself into a nice little middle relief role and has excelled there. He came in, he does hit Ronald Acuna, but limited damage, with 1 run there. You'd rather that happen than having Ronald Acuna hit a grand slam that puts the Braves up.
Or clear the bases on a double or something,
But then strikes out Austin Riley, strikes out Ozzie Albies. Like, that to me was like, it was like a mirror image of each other of what happened 20 years ago. And I don't know if we want to keep living in the past with this or nothing. I know we want to keep this current and everything, but I had that moment going into this series that like this is that type of series that like could prove to the rest of the baseball world that this Cubs team is for real.
Yeah. Yeah. And like I said, I think it's one that, if the Cubs keep at this trajectory, we can look back at this series to say this was the series that they felt encouraged or motivated or inspired, and hit their stride. So, and I think the other thing that was really great from that series too is we saw Dansby Swanson against his old team, and he
Yes.
he didn't have the greatest series. He went 2 for 10 in that entire 3-game set, but I thought the 2 hits that he had were very crucial. He had a 2-run double in one and a 2-run home run in the other to give us a 4-1 or 4-0 lead in one game, and then the other one I know he I want to see either put us on top or he or he tied the game. I can't remember, but he, the 2 hits that he had, super crucial, and it was great to see against his old team. I don't know if you saw this, but I was seeing a lot of like just negative stuff on Twitter from like Braves fans, just like insufferable over like Dansby Swanson. And like, it was like right after the 8-0 game where they are just like shitting on Dansby for no reason. It's like, he's like
for no reason other than wanting to go and get paid by a team that's willing to pay him.
Right. The Braves didn't want to pay him. He went to the team that did. And it was, he wasn't like, hey, fuck y'all guys, I'm not taking your contract serious. They offered him, I think, 6 years, $100 million. He got $77 million more from the Cubs. Why would he not take that? Right.
I mean, look, I don't want to dive too deep on the Braves and their fans and everything like that. It was just rough. I generally believe all people are good. I will say, like, or I guess I just have the question, like, did they do this with Freddie Freeman? Did they do this with,
I think so.
Tom Glavine or Greg Maddux when they left? Like, I get that they're a team. Granted, these days, the Braves have been a really good franchise at getting their young players locked up early in their careers for a very cheap price. And I think they assumed they would get that with Dansby Swanson, and well, Dansby Swanson thought otherwise and went to go get a payday in Chicago, and it has worked out well for us here.
Yeah, I think it's worked out for everyone, and it's like, I don't even get why the Braves are so butthurt about it anyways. They're getting pretty solid shortstop play from Orlando Arcia. It's not like he's having a really solid year. I think he was an all-star this year or pretty close to it. So, I mean, it's not like they've have any loss. And like you said, they have like the deepest lineup in the National League. So it's not like,
yes.
And the thing is, it's like, Dansby Swanson is not like some anti-hero, right? He's not like Wilson Contreras, who's like coming in, clapping and being obnoxious, right? He's not one of those players that's real rambunctious. Like, he just plays just a real clean game, man. I don't get it. I don't understand it. I was totally lost.
He did have a little moment. I believe it was game 2 when Raul Acuna did hit a double at one point, and just as a little bit of a joke, I believe, Dansby came in with a little nut tap on Acuna just to give him a little friendly hello there. But other than that, I don't think there's any animosity from the Braves team towards, towards Dansby Swanson. And, they still have found a way to be as good of a team as they were when they had him too.
Yeah.
So, like, why be bitter about it?
I have no idea. But all right, well, let's move to our next segment. This is a new segment that we're going to be trying out. It's called Start or DFA, where I'm going to give Mike 2 different stat lines from 2 different players, and Mike has to either pick if he's going to start them on his team or if he's going to designate them for assignment. So I'm going to make it tough. You can't bench them. You can't option them to AAA. You can either start them or you have to DFA them. All right?
All right, let's do it.
All right, so the first 2 players, I'm just going to preface, they are current players. They're playing this year in Major League Baseball. These are 2023 stats up until Sunday night, so no updated from today if they had games. So I'm going to tell you player A has a stat line, batting line of 272, 329 on base, 394 slug, OPS of 723. This guy has 21 doubles, 27 stolen bases, 58 RBIs, and he has struck out 62 times this year. Player B has a stat line of 257, 321 on base, 433 slug, OPS of 754, 24 doubles, also 27 stolen bases, 62 RBI, so 4 more than player A, but has more than twice the strikeouts at 131 strikeouts. So are you taking player A or player B?
This is very tough because you only included doubles. You didn't include home runs with this.
It didn't.
This is a little tricky. Seemingly player A is the better contact hitter, better on base guy slightly. Player B has a little bit more power, but is more of a strikeout threat. Feel like the guy with the more power might have the more upside. They're both great runners, apparently. 27 stolen base. I think I'll go with the higher slugging percentage, higher OPS. I'll go with player B. Who do we got? Pull back the curtain.
So player A is Nico Horner.
Oh wow.
Player B is Seattle's Julio Rodriguez.
Wow. Right on par with J-Rod. That's
I was very shocked to look at some of those slash lines being so similar. You know, the doubles power, stolen base power, or stolen base, dead on even. And I think I want to say Nico has 8 home runs to Julio's like 19 home runs. So, about less than half than what Julio has. But all in all, I mean, pretty impressive.
Please don't take this as me calling for Nico Horner to be DFA now, because I love Nico Horner. But I mean, this is right. I mean, and this is Nico Horner mainly as a leadoff hitter too, with almost as much RBIs as a guy who mainly hits third or fourth in Seattle. So like that's pretty damn impressive. And like, how is his slugging percentage only 433? I thought he had more power than that.
Right. I was really surprised to see that. So kudos to Nico for keeping up with Julio Rodriguez, who, a lot of people think is one of the future faces of the game. So great job to Nico. All right. We'll do one more. So these two players, I'm not going to say if they are anything about them, but what I will say is that this is over 162 game average. So this is their career numbers over, if they played 162 games, this is what their averages would be.
Okay.
So player A, batting average of 274, on base of 364, slug of 557, OPS of 920. Would average 29 doubles, would average 40 home runs, would average 102 RBIs, would average 19 stolen bases. Player B, batting average of 284, on base of 370, slug 538, OPS of 907, would average 32 doubles, 38 home runs, 111 RBIs, and 11 steals.
So we got another. Yeah. We got another matchup of one player with a higher batting average and a higher on base versus a player with a higher slugging and overall OPS. You get 29 doubles from the 40 homer guy. You get 32 doubles from the 38 homer guy. Get a few more steals, though, from the 40 homer guy. Maybe not as clutch from the 40 homer guy if he's driving in only 102 and the other guy's driving in 111. I think, I think I would start player B, DFA player A, even though I would love to have that sort of stat line on my team, but I got to go with player B. The home runs are just a shade under, a little bit more doubles, a little bit more extra base power. Let's go ahead and see who player A and player B are.
Player A is Shohei Ohtani.
Mike.
Player B.
Oh my God.
Player B, Ken Griffey Jr. So
okay,
it's a Hall of Famer. It's a for sure Hall of Famer.
It's a Hall of Famer, but you're telling me that I just DFA'd the GOAT, John. Jeez, like the guy who is the most talented. You didn't give me his pitching numbers too. What the hell? Did Ken Griffey Jr. ever pitch? Come on.
I don't know if he did. Maybe in mop-up. I don't know. But we could ask the bums if he ever did in a Sox uniform. But
yeah,
yeah,
he did in the blackout game.
I wasn't gonna make this easy for you. This is incredibly hard, right? And I think what's really crazy impressive here is like if Shohei keeps at this trajectory, like, man, these are like you basically said it, right? Like you're talking GOAT status. Because I mean,
yes,
most people will say that one of the greatest hitters of all time was Ken Griffey Jr. So now you have a guy who's got a very similar stat line in terms of batting, and also has an ERA of right around 3 career-wise. So I mean,
and I'll say this for Griffey too. So I mean, the slash line you provided is like that's career regardless of if it's a 162 game pace. But the fact that his numbers are that high, with him having a lot of injuries later in his career with the Reds too, and they're still like right on par with the guy who's the best, like clearly the best player in the game today. Like that's pretty damn incredible.
Yep. Awesome. I thought you did a great job. I mean, I tried to make it really hard for you. So I would have picked, I mean, and that's the thing is I wanted to do this where it's not name based, because if I'm looking at it, like I personally, I probably, if you told me if I had to start a franchise with a healthy guy and I had to pick between Ken Griffey Jr. or Ohtani, I probably would pick Griffey. I know that might be crazy to say because Ohtani could do both, but I would lean into the fact that Griffey's done it over, to your point, a really extended career, where he's done it in a short amount of time. And again, you would like to think that he's going to continue at this pace, but you just said it. Griffey did this well into his late 30s.
Right. I mean, we would be talking about Ken Griffey Jr. the way that we talk about Barry Bonds and Babe Ruth and Hank Aaron. Like he probably would have gotten to 700, maybe even 800 home runs if he could have stayed healthy in all those years after he left Seattle.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that is as far as you can't, it's so hard to compare anyone to Shohei Ohtani because there's no one else to base him off of other than Babe Ruth. But even Babe Ruth wasn't like a full-time hitter and a full-time pitcher at the same time like Shohei Ohtani is.
And Babe Ruth never played against a Dominican player in his life.
This is true. So. Or a black player or an Asian player or go on down the line. Yeah.
Not the same. All right. Well, I'm glad that we got through that. I'm excited to continue doing this segment the next few weeks and trying to see what you come up with. But let's jump into our flying the W's, taking the L's, because I know we have a couple more segments we want to get to, but I have a good feeling that our flying the W's and taking the L's are going to lead us into some of our final segments. So
for sure.
I'm gonna let you go ahead and start out with your W's and your L's, and then I'll go with mine, and then we can jump into the last topics.
Okay, well, first W I'll go to, and we touched on this when we were recapping, the Braves in the Red Series, is overall the Cubs bullpen. They were asked to work a ton in those two series. Namely, just special shout out to Javier Assad, who came in to mop up Marcus Stroman's Game 1 start against the Reds, went, scoreless throughout the rest of that game. The Cubs came back, made a great comeback effort in that game, but came up a little bit short, maybe, literally a couple inches short on that Christopher Morel near home run. But I mean, that entire stretch, that entire homestand, the Cubs only got one quality start that entire time. It was the blowout 20-9 game that Justin Steele started. Other than that, no Cubs starting pitcher went beyond 5 innings. So you were asking a lot from the Cubs bullpen these two series. Other W, a guy that I often criticize a lot, a guy that I didn't want him when he was hired here, and I'm still not totally sure if he's the right man for the job. But let's hear it for David Ross for the way he's handled the bullpen and, navigating through some tough situations when, it wasn't just a matter of his starting pitchers weren't going deep into games, but they were, not giving him great starts. They were digging him in a hole early. Marcus Stroman in Game 1 against the Reds. Drew Smyly what was that, Game 2, Game 3 or Game 4 against the Reds? Kyle Hendricks against the Braves had a poor start, but, cobbled together. You didn't really need your important relievers in that game when you were down that big. But you still cobbled together an effort to get through that game. And then, of course, with what you got from Michael Fulmer in that escape artistry in yesterday's game. So, David Ross and the Cubs bullpen, they get my W's.
Yeah, love that. How about your who's taking the L for you this week?
Well, this may be a little bit old news, but it went pretty viral at right around the end of last week's Cardinals series. I maybe might have mentioned this, or maybe was planning to mention this before my internet crapped out last week. But, folks, let me introduce you to a St. Louis man named Daniel Donnelly Jr., a.k.a. the Rally Runner. He, this past week, was arrested for his participation in the January 6, 2021 insurrection on the U.S. Capitol. During that insurrection, he was seen wearing red face paint, as most were. He used a riot shield to push away Capitol Police. He helped rioters advance onto the Capitol property and inside the Capitol building. He was ultimately charged with 1 count of felony civil disorder and 3 misdemeanor counts of disorderly impeding through Capitol grounds, theft of government property, and disorderly conduct. So there you have it, your prototypical Cardinals fan. Shout out Daniel Donnelly Jr., the Rally Runner.
Oh, man, that's the Cardinals way, the Molina way, right?
Exactly.
Gotta love it. My goodness. I mean,
the Miles Michaelis Chip Carey way.
Yeah. Oh, man. All right. Well, I'm going to jump into my fly in the W's. I don't know how I'm going to top that one, but I'm going to have a couple W's. So I'm going to have a big W. I'm going to have like a smaller W that will lead into my L. So the big W, we do this a lot as fans, right? When an umpire strike zone is awful, we chastise that bastard and we give it to him terribly hard, right? Like it is the Angel Hernandez's, the Joe West. We Absolutely. Shit on those guys. When they suck, and we just cannot, like, we become insufferable watching them,
Phil
right?
Cuzzy, Brian O'Nora, list goes on and on and on with umpires.
Yeah, right. So my W this week is actually Derek Thomas. Derek Thomas was the head ump for the Cubs-Reds game, the game that the Cubs won 5-3. I don't know if you picked up on that.
I know where you're going with this.
His strike zone was unbelievable, where like I was like, forget trying to do robo umps. Let's try to focus on ump cloning. Because that dude's strike zone was probably the tightest strike zone I have ever seen. It was he had a 94.4% accuracy, which
was that from umpire scorecards.
It is.
Okay.
So he is, I believe, the top rated ump in the league this year, and I want to say he's like in his first year as being an ump, if I'm not mistaken.
Really? Wow.
I'm not sure. I might have to look back on that, but this year he's the top rated ump. His accuracy is through the roof. He's the best, balls and strike umpire in the league. So I wanted to shout out Derek Thomas because I mean, it just we never give credit where credit's due. When an ump does a good job, we're always ready to shit on him when they do a terrible job. And this guy did an awesome job. I mean, just great strike zone. That was also the game that Derek Bell got thrown out of for arguing the balls and strike.
I was going to say, yes, like oddly enough, we're complimenting him for balls and strike calls, but the Reds manager did wind up getting ejected in that game. Now, granted, I think that was way more of just a pissed off manager seeing his team constantly getting beat all week and wanting to show some sign of life to them. But at the end of the day, like, what can you really argue against him? He was calling it very.
He couldn't. And was crazy. He wasn't animated at all getting tossed out. Like, it's like he was like basically, it looked like he went up and said, hey, like, I need you to throw me out. Like, I need to smoke my guys. Like, I need you to toss me. Like, I forgot who did that. I feel like there was a Cubs manager who did that.
There's a story, if we have some time. I remember there being a story about Adrian Beltre when he was on the Rangers in spring training a few years ago. He was asked by whoever the Rangers manager was at that time, basically told him before a spring training game, this was like late in spring training, I need you to play all 9 innings. This is Adrian freaking Beltre, 15 years into a Hall of Fame career, asking me play all 9 innings of a spring training game. So he goes up there for his first plate appearance of the game in that game and tells the umpire, I need you to throw me out of this game so I don't have to play all 9 innings of it. And he winds up, there's a whole athletic piece on this, I believe. He winds up, like, every close call that was there, he was just cussing the umpire out, calling him every obscenity in the book. And if you actually go back and watch the video of it, you could see the catcher just dying, laughing under his mask, because this umpire was not having it. He was saying to Adrian, like, if I got to stay out here all day, so do you, pal.
I love that. That's awesome. All right. Well, I'm going to, my last W, right? And then it'll lead into my taking the L because it's kind of synonymous. So I'm going to give the final W of the week to the umpire who got out of the way and let Jose Ramirez and Tim Anderson square off. It was so great to see an ump say, I'm out. Y'all do you in the box, go for it. I'm not getting hit. I'm
not holding anyone back in this one.
And you know what? It's crazy because, like, in baseball, like, I mean, I think most baseball fans will agree. Baseball players are probably the worst when it comes to fighting. Like, you got your hockey players, your football players. Well, basketball's kind of close, but
football players are bad when it's like two guys that are still wearing helmets and they're trying to hit each other in the helmet. But baseball's probably a rung right below that. Hockey, you can understand because it's part of the game and everything,
right.
But
Yeah. So to see that, I'm like, man, baseball needs more of this, right? Where you're letting guys just duke it out like that, and you see two guys go at it. So kudos to that for getting out of the way, letting it happen, which leads me to my taking the L. It's not Tim Anderson. It's actually Tim Anderson's chin. Because I made the joke.
Getting real specific there.
No, specifically his chin. And I think you saw me all over social media all weekend just spouting off saying his chin was weaker than the AL Central. So that was just sad, and like I said, I know we were going to talk about it. We'll obviously let the main bums talk about their team a little bit more. So I don't want to just completely dump on the White Sox, but it is pretty big baseball news. If it happened to another team, we probably would talk about it. But dude, it was embarrassing. I mean, I don't know how Tim Anderson shows his face, especially like in the city of Chicago again, right? Like a blue collar city that's super tough. And this dude put up his dukes, acted like he was going to go in hard, and just got knocked the fuck out.
I mean, listen, give him credit for at least standing his ground, but stay on your feet, my dude, and play a little defense too. Like, you got the hands up first, but then you put them right down. Get your hands up, cover your face, man.
Oh my God. I was listening to sports radio all weekend, and you had guys calling in that were boxing fans that were basically breaking it down, where they're like, you're a right-handed, you're a right-handed guy. You left your left wide open to get hit by Jose. You can't do that. I was dying the entire weekend. The amount of memes, the comments, like in every thread. I mean, maybe I'll give that W to the people out there that were just all over social media, and it was hilarious. I mean, it was embarrassing, but
the one I saw that had me dying laughing was like I'm a huge Simpsons fan. If you haven't found out already, I on our Twitter account, follow us at Bums and Bleachers. I couldn't get the full name in there, but follow us at Bums and Bleachers on Twitter. I'm the one running that. The funniest one that I saw was it wasn't even a GIF, but it was a picture of just Marge Simpson, like, kind of on one knee, going for like an uppercut, and then Tim Anderson on the ground.
I saw that, and
yeah,
oh my God, I know we talked about it pre-show too, like what the Guardians affiliates did, their Class A affiliates of the Guardians, that anybody whose name was Tim, if you had a ticket to a game this week, they're doing a Jose Ramirez Appreciation Week. I don't know if that was already premeditated or if that was just, they're just doing that as part of like marketing for their team. But for this week, for Jose Ramirez Appreciation Week, if your name was Tim and you have a ticket to the game, you get in for free and can lay out in the grass to watch the game or not. So
gotta love minor league baseball and their wacky promos.
Yeah,
especially
like
when they're like seemingly on the spot like this too.
yeah, hilarious, man. So I mean, the amount of stuff that we've seen, I saw the Jose Ramirez IG meme. He had the boxing gloves on IG and
Yes.
stories. I mean, God, just embarrassing. But that leads me into like our last topic. Just thinking through TA, right? Like I think a couple years ago he was on the rise as one of these like great athletes in Chicago. Not even just the White Sox, but like the one of the faces of like Chicago sports. We obviously saw the Bulls kind of sitting in mediocrity. The Bears were rebuilding and just kind of being the shit team that they were. Have you ever seen a Chicago or Cubs athlete that has fallen from grace faster than Tim Anderson?
I mean, I gotta say, there's a couple options that come to mind. There is a big one that I'll save for last, but I mean, I think um, around like 2016, 2017, the Bulls were they got rid of Derrick Rose, but they were still trying to like piece it together, and they brought in guys like Rajon Rondo and Dwayne Wade and a bunch of these guys from the previous Bulls had been duking it out with in the Eastern Conference playoffs for years, and like it could not have been a more toxic locker room. And Fred Hoiberg was coach at the time. He didn't know what the hell he was doing when it came to running an NBA locker room.
Yep.
I remember there was some quote about Rajon Rondo talking about like, my vets wouldn't act this way. My vets, this and that. They're better leaders than that. The guy that takes the cake for me, though, and it pains me to say this because I had real high hopes for him his few years, and he was on the 2016 World Series team. I actually tweeted a video of something he did earlier today when the news broke of a White Sox trade in which they traded for Tyler Naquin. But it's got to be Addison Russell. Addison Russell was touted as like a future MVP when the Cubs traded for him from the A's.
Yep.
Comes up. Yeah, the next Barry Larkin, exactly. Comes up in 2015, makes some amazing defensive plays. 2016, he's part of the Cubs All-Star infield. They go on to win the World Series in large part because of what he did in Game 6, too, with the grand slam and that bloop single that Naquin missed. Yep. You're welcome. But, then midway through 2017, some reports start leaking out that he's not only behaving well with his female friends, but apparently not being very faithful to them either. And then later we come to find out that, he has children with multiple different women. He's abusing some of the women in his life.
Yep.
So yeah, as far as a guy who, I had such high hopes for and was given such a big reason to believe early on, it's got to be Addison Russell as far as like a high fall from grace with the Cubs.
Yeah, I mean it's a good call. I mean he definitely saw the highest of highs, and I mean that'll do it, right? Domestic abuse right away. I mean that's gonna pretty much shoot your career right in the ground in most cases. And I think every league is a little bit different. Nudge nudge NFL. But yeah, I think the fall from grace from TA I thought has been really interesting. He went as a guy that I remember it was just a couple of years ago. There was the debate: who would you want as your shortstop? Do you want Tim Anderson or would you want Javier Baez? Right, and both were flashy. And then TA obviously was starting to get on some commercials. Right. He was obviously
TA won a batting title. Yeah. Javier Baez damn near won an MVP, and then the next season had basically, a season right on par with the one he had before that. He actually looked really strong with the Mets after the Cubs made that trade in 2021. Yeah. He's taken quite a dip since then, but we still love Javi over here on the north side. Yeah. I remember all the, Twitter debates between Cubs and White Sox fans of like, Tim Anderson's the best shortstop in Chicago. We'll say these days, there's not really debate these days with Dansby Swanson.
I don't think they're debating anymore, but yeah, I mean, it's kind of sad to see, but I think like we saw the reports coming out with Jesse Rogers, like talking through like what that White Sox team is right now. Like there was a report about Grandal potentially slapping Tim Anderson. I mean, just everything that I think a lot of just not even just Sox fans, but baseball fans just kind of heard and kind of assumed from the culture of the team is all coming out now. We talked pregame with Baloney, and he was saying, let it all out, right? Like, it needs to come to service at this point because you won't get change otherwise. But I think it's just, man, what a Reinsdorf thing, right? Like, you just kind of talked about the Bulls with Fred Hoiberg. We saw Jim Boylan. Like, it's just these cultures of like lack of accountability and just I don't know. I don't even know how to word it at this point. I mean, it's just Reinsdorf run teams, man. I just I'm thankful, and not that I'm going to completely back Ricketts here, but I guess he could be Jerry. So
that's true. Worse, right? We could be stuck being fans of not one but two Jerry Reinsdorf owned teams. Like, decent amount of people in Chicago are these days. And listen, I know we got a lot of White Sox fans that watch us and follow us from the overlap with the bums and everything. We welcome you all. We're not trying to shit on you guys. We're not trying to shit on your team. But at this point, it's kind of national news that like the White Sox are the biggest laughing stock in baseball. I'm sorry, but that with how bad they've been, we weren't just going to not talk about it.
But I mean, to Baloney's point, I agree. I mean, it needs to, like, as bad as it is right now and as bad as it could be, it needs to all come out. I mean, it literally needs to all come out because you don't get change otherwise. Like, maybe this will be the pushing move to get rid of like the Kenny Williams and get rid of, the Rick Hahns, and, maybe, I don't know. I doubt that they'll ever get Jerry to sell the team, but yeah.
Well, I think this, at the very least, you're probably going to see Pedro Grifol go bye-bye after the season because, like, the culture
that's sad.
It's
sad.
It was bad. It was bad with Tony La Russa, and everyone thought they would have a bigger boost after firing Tony La Russa and bringing in Pedro. At least it's not a matter of, at least Pedro seemingly knows what he's doing, but the culture has seemingly not changed at all. There was one more point I wanted to bring up too about what happened this past weekend with the Cubs and Braves. I'm sorry I cut you off there, John.
Yeah, go for it.
Just one thing I wanted to bring up, and we're flying real high after seeing the Cubs win 2 out of 3 from the Braves. This is, like I said, this could be the series that puts this Cubs team on the map the same way that Cubs-Yankees series in 2003 did. However, there is a little bit of a red flag that popped up with me on this, and that is the Cubs do play the Braves in Atlanta late in September. I believe it's the second to last series of the year. By then, you would think that the Braves would have clinched the NL East, would have wrapped everything up. Maybe they might still be in a battle with the Dodgers for the number 1 seed in the NL West.
Yep.
But you never know if they might possibly be thinking to themselves when they play the Cubs in Atlanta that it's a team they need to take a little bit more seriously, and they're not going to rest their starters for that series if there's any sort of chance of keeping the Cubs out of the playoffs, if the Cubs are still in the middle of a tight NL Central and NL wildcard race like they are now. So just something to consider going down the stretch with going down the stretch late in the year against the Braves. I know a lot of people had that pinned on their calendars, thinking about the potential if the Cubs were to come back, like that's an easy series they could take late in the year. May not be as much. The thing I was talking about too with my a buddy the other night is that it may have been a longer, like long term, may have benefited the Cubs to get swept this series, so that the opposite could have happened. That like maybe the Braves. I'm not saying I was rooting for the Cubs to get swept at all, but if the goal was only to make the playoffs this year, and the Braves saw the Cubs as an easy opponent in the playoffs that they could possibly beat up on in the first round, they may have been willing to just rest everyone and call up guys from AAA to play in that series against the Cubs to just let them in. But at least now you're getting somewhat of a challenge right before the playoffs.
I think it's too long of a season to play like that what if game though. I think it's too hard to say like, well, maybe you should rest guys, or maybe you should take it easy going against Atlanta. Like, we're in a position, you got to win every game you can. And we worry about Atlanta when we get back to Atlanta. And I think looking at the Cubs schedule the rest of the year, They have the weakest schedule in the National League.
This is true. Especially this month. Especially, yeah.
Yeah, they got to take care of business. And I think that's what it comes down to. Like, if you're a good team, what good teams do is they beat up on bad teams. So if they're as good as they think they are, or they're as good as we hope that they are, they need to beat up on these bad teams. And when you get to Atlanta, then you worry about Atlanta at that point again. And once the playoff starts, I think if you get solid pitching, we already know we got a great defense. Anything could happen. So I think it doesn't matter, in my opinion. Like, I get what you're saying. I think it's win every game you can. When you get to Atlanta again, we'll see what happens, and maybe we go in there and we do it again. And you say, you know what? We are for real. We've taken 4 out of 6 from you, or 5 out of 7, whatever, or 5 out of 6, I should say. But, whatever the number is. But that brings me up to our final thing real quick is, we're not going to be back until Sunday or Monday. We got 6 games here this week, all in the we have 3 in the National League East and then 3 in the AL East. So we have 3 with the Mets and 3 with Toronto. Right now, the Cubs are losing 7-2 in the top of the 7th. There's a current rain delay, so I know obviously this is recorded, but at this point in the podcast, they are in a rain delay, losing 7-2. So if they lose this game, which by all accounts looks like they may, unless they surmount a big comeback, they've got 5 more games the rest of the week. What do you think their record ends up being, or what do you think it needs to be?
Well, it is unfortunate they're losing right now against a team that I think we all were banking on them taking at least 2 out of 3 this series. And, the pitching matchups the next 2 nights do favor the Cubs, so they could still easily do that. I think, this road trip, I would have to say that I would bank on them winning about, I would say 4-2, because you have the better pitching matched up the next 2 days with the Mets. Then you'll have Justin Steele in the middle of the Toronto series too.
Yep.
And their pitching has struggled pretty mightily too. Alek Manoah has been up and down.
Yep.
Jose Barrios has not looked all that great since getting traded from the Twins. So,
yep.
There's potential there to. I believe they'll wind up taking at least 4 on this road trip.
I agree. I think they're going to go 4-2 on this road trip. I think that's kind of where they need to live if they're going to continue to fight for the division here. I know we're tied for a wild card spot as it stands right now in this moment, but I think the division is where you want to close that up. And then after that, we've got our schedule softens up a good amount where we have 2 against the White Sox. We've got 3 against Kansas City, 3 against Detroit, and 4 against Pittsburgh. So, playing a lot of the AL Central, which, we just kind of joked around about, but that division hasn't been very good all year. And then, Pittsburgh, I think in division sometimes could give you some trouble, but you've got about 12 games there, that you hopefully can try to go on another run there and finish up
Exactly.
10-2 and really take a stranglehold of this division.
Absolutely. I mean, that's one that, you have a little bit of familiarity in there too. Already played the White Sox once. You already have played the Pirates a couple times now, and you haven't lost a game to them yet. So, they dominated against those teams before we knew the potential of this team and before they made the trade to improve their offense with adding Candelario and adding more depth to the bullpen and Quas. So, I very much agree that, those are games that the Cubs need to feast on and hopefully find themselves in first place by the time those series are over.
It'd be great. So maybe we'll have some more great news to talk about next Sunday or Monday, whenever we record next. But final plug, I'm going to plug again. Bourbon Bums from the Chicago Sports Bums. CD Liquors, Bolingbrook, Knob Creek Single Barrel Pick. Go out and get it. Great bourbon, great whiskey. Love it. Appreciate y'all for tuning in and listening. Have a good rest of your night.
Have a good rest of the night. Go Cubs.
Go Cubs.